The floor beneath my feet begins to hum before anyone speaks a single word, and I know, in that instant, that something terrible is about to happen. I am sitting in the tallest chamber of the assembly, surrounded by delegates from 42 worlds, and every single one of them is looking at me. Not at the human delegation, at me. My name is Daniel Ashford, and I have spent 11 years representing Earth in this chamber, but I have never felt this many eyes on me at once. The chief arbiter, a tall being named Vesic, with skin like polished stone, raises one long arm, and the chamber falls silent. The silence is worse than noise. It presses on my chest like a hand. "Delegate Ashford," Vesic says, his voice carried through a translator that makes him sound calm, almost gentle. "The Assembly has reached a decision regarding the matter of the Kellhorn border incident. I already know this is not going to end well. I have watched this play out for 3 weeks now, watched allies grow quiet, watched old friends stop meeting my eyes in the hallways. The Kellhorn incident was small, a border dispute between a human trade convoy and a group of unlicensed raiders, resolved in under 6 minutes with no lasting harm to either side. But somehow, in the hands of the wrong storytellers, 6 minutes became a legend, and the legend became a fear. The evidence presented," Vesic continues, "shows that human response capability exceeds safe thresholds established by this assembly. Human vessels reacted to an unprovoked threat with a speed and precision that no other member species could match. A murmur runs through the chamber, and I want to stand and say that reacting quickly to danger is not a crime, that surviving is not an act of aggression. But I have learned, over 11 years, that the moment you raise your voice in this chamber, you lose the room." I glance toward my right, where Delegate Priya Malhotra sits beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She has been my partner in this posting for 4 years, sharp as a blade and twice as patient as I am. She gives me a small shake of her head. "Not yet," she is telling me. "Let them finish." Vesic lifts a datapad, and the chamber's massive display behind him lights up with numbers, charts, projections. I recognize some of them as twisted versions of reports my own government submitted in good faith years ago, meant to build trust, now being used as evidence against us. "The Committee on Species Parity," Vesic says, "recommends immediate and total separation." The words land like a dropped weight. Separation. Not sanction, not warning, not probation. Separation. Effective in 90 standard days, he continues. All human vessels, personnel, and installations are to withdraw from assembly-protected space, trade lanes, and shared stations. Human representation in this chamber will be revoked. All existing treaties between humanity and member species will be considered void. I feel Priya's hand find mine under the table, gripping hard enough to hurt. I do not look at her. I am staring at Vesic, waiting for him to say this is some kind of test, a warning meant to scare us into compliance. He does not say that. He simply lowers the datapad and waits, as if expecting me to object, as if part of him wants me to give him a reason to soften the blow. I do not give him one. Instead, I stand slowly, smooth down the front of my jacket, and speak in the steadiest voice I can manage. "The human delegation acknowledges the Assembly's decision," I say. "We will comply with the timeline given." A ripple of surprise moves through the chamber. I can see it in the way several delegates lean toward one another, whispering behind translator devices that do not quite hide their confusion. They expected anger. They expected pleading. Perhaps some small part of them wanted it, wanted the satisfaction of watching humanity beg to stay in a house that no longer wanted us. I do not give them that either. As we walk out of the chamber, Priya keeps pace beside me, her jaw tight, her eyes forward. Neither of us speaks until we are inside the private transport pod, doors sealed, engines humming low. "They actually did it," she says quietly. "After everything we gave them, the medical exchanges, the relief convoys during the Threll famine, the shipping lanes we secured for free just to build goodwill, they did it anyway. They were always going to do it," I say, and I am surprised by how calm my own voice sounds, because inside, my thoughts are anything but calm. "We just didn't want to believe it." Priya turns to look at me, and there is something new in her expression, something sharper than sadness. You don't seem shocked. I choose my next words carefully, because even inside this sealed pod, I have learned never to assume privacy. I'm not, I say simply. She studies me for a long moment, and I can see the question behind her eyes, the one she is too smart to ask out loud. How long have you known this was coming? How long has home been preparing for a day like this? The transport pod glides through the outer ring of the station, passing enormous viewports that look out over a graveyard of ships from a dozen different species, docked in neutral space, waiting for permits, waiting for trade slots, waiting for a system that has always run smoother than anyone wanted to admit, mostly because human logistics crews kept it running. I think about the quiet years before this moment, the years when nobody outside a small circle back home understood what was truly being built. I think about training exercises labeled as routine maintenance drills, about colony ships quietly stocked far beyond their official manifests, about engineers who left prestigious postings without explanation and were never spoken of again. I think about warnings that came from unlikely sources, quiet officials who pulled me aside at diplomatic dinners over the years and told me, in careful, coded language, that humanity would not always be welcome here and that we should prepare accordingly. I did not know the details. I still do not know all of them. But I know enough to understand that today is not an ending. Today is the beginning of something that has been planned for a very long time, something far bigger than one accusation about a border skirmish that never should have mattered. Daniel, Priya says, her voice low, what happens now? I look out the viewport one last time, at the tangled mess of alliances and treaties and fragile trust that took decades to build and only minutes to destroy. Somewhere out there, 90 days from now, every human ship, every human family, every human flag will be gone from this space entirely. Now, I say, we go home, and we let them see what happens when the quiet stops. The pod docks at the private terminal reserved for departing delegations, and as the doors slide open, cool recycled air rushes in, carrying with it the low mechanical hum of a station that has, until this very hour, felt like a second home to me. I step out first, Priya close behind, and neither of us looks back toward the chamber we just left. Ahead of us, at the far end of the terminal, our transport ship waits, engines already warming, its hull marked with the simple blue emblem of Earth's diplomatic corps. In 3 months, that emblem will not exist anywhere in this system. In 3 months, an entire species that once sat quietly at the edges of galactic politics, careful, polite, and endlessly patient, will vanish from the picture entirely. I do not know yet exactly what waits for us on the other side of that departure. I only know, with a certainty that settles cold and steady in my chest, that the Assembly has just made a decision it does not understand the weight of, and that somewhere far from this station, plans older than this crisis are already beginning to move. As I climb the ramp into the ship, I allow myself one final glance back at the chamber tower rising behind us, its lights glowing steady against the dark of space, unaware that it has just lit the fuse on something none of its delegates are prepared for. The ramp closes behind me with a quiet, final hiss, and for the first time in 11 years, I do not feel like a guest in someone else's house. I feel like a person going home to pack for a war that has not yet been declared, but has already begun. The journey home takes 11 days, and I spend most of them staring at star charts instead of sleeping. Priya finds me on the 3rd night in the observation deck, a cup of something warm in each hand, and she sits beside me without saying a word for a long time. You should rest, she finally says. I will, I tell her, though we both know I am lying. When we finally drop out of transit above Earth, I expect to feel relief. Instead, I feel something closer to disbelief. The orbital docks are busier than I have ever seen them, but there is no panic in the movement, no chaos in the traffic patterns. Ships move with the discipline of a rehearsed drill, gliding into position, loading and unloading with quiet, practiced efficiency. It looks less like a civilization bracing for exile and more like a machine that has been waiting years for someone to finally flip the switch. Priya notices it too. I can see it in the way her eyes narrow as she studies the traffic feeds on the display beside our seats. "This isn't how a planet reacts to a crisis," she murmurs. "This is how a planet reacts to a plan." I do not answer her, because I do not yet have the clearance to explain what I am starting to understand, only the growing certainty that everything I thought I knew about our quiet diplomatic mission was only ever the visible layer of something much deeper. We are met at the terminal by a man I have known for over a decade, though I have never seen him look quite this serious. His name is Marcus Whitfield, head of Earth's Foreign Contingency Office, a soft-spoken man who has always reminded me more of a university professor than a strategist. Today, his calm feels different, sharper, deliberate. "Daniel," he says, shaking my hand firmly. "Priya, I'm glad you're both back safe." "Marcus," I say, "what is going on? The docks, the traffic, none of this looks like a planet that just got exiled from galactic society." He offers a small, tired smile. "Walk with me." We follow him through a private corridor that bypasses the usual customs checkpoints, down several levels, until we reach a briefing room I have never seen before, tucked behind unmarked doors that require 3 separate biometric scans to open. Inside, a dozen officials are already seated around a long table, screens glowing with star maps, supply charts, and fleet positions I do not recognize. "Sit," Marcus says. "You both deserve to understand what's happening, especially now." Priya and I take our seats, and Marcus begins speaking without any of the usual diplomatic padding I have grown used to over the years. 17 years ago, he says, a group of analysts inside 3 different governments came to the same uncomfortable conclusion at almost the same time. Humanity was rising too fast for the Assembly's comfort, and history told us exactly how frightened established powers tend to treat rising ones. We did not know exactly when the moment would come, or exactly what form it would take, but we knew it was coming. He taps the table, and the display shifts to show construction timelines, shipyards, colony expansions, all marked with dates stretching back further than I expected. "So we prepared," he continues, quietly, patiently. "We built shipyards in systems the Assembly never bothered to inspect closely, because they assumed we lacked the resources to expand beyond our approved boundaries. We trained engineers and pilots under civilian cover programs. We stockpiled resources under humanitarian classifications that nobody questioned, because nobody imagined we would need them for anything but disaster relief." I lean forward, feeling something between awe and unease. "You built an exit strategy." "We built an independence strategy," Marcus corrects gently. "Leaving the Assembly was never meant to be a punishment we would suffer. It was meant to be a door we would eventually walk through, on our own terms, whenever the moment came that made staying no longer worth the cost." Priya's voice is quiet when she speaks, "And you're telling us that moment is now." "The moment was always going to come eventually," Marcus says. "The Kellhorn incident simply gave them the excuse they wanted. We've been ready for this scenario for years. The 90-day window they gave us is more than enough." I think of the calm traffic patterns at the orbital docks, the disciplined movement of ships that should have looked chaotic under crisis, but instead looked rehearsed. I think of engineers who vanished from public postings without explanation, of supply requisitions that always seemed slightly larger than official missions required. Pieces I never fully understood begin sliding into place. "There's something else," Marcus says, and his tone shifts, growing more careful. 2 days ago, we received an unusual visit. A representative from the Dorith Collective requested a private audience, off the official record. No witnesses, no translators from their own government present, only one of ours. "The Dorith almost never break protocol like that," Priya says. "They're the most cautious species in the entire Assembly, which is exactly why we listened," Marcus says. He gestures, and the display shifts again, showing a recording, silent at first, of a small, slender figure seated across a table from a single human aide. Marcus plays the audio, and a synthesized voice fills the room, careful and precise. "We do not agree with the Assembly's decision," the recorded voice says, but we cannot openly oppose it. What I ask is this: whatever your people plan to do in response, do not retaliate. Do not strike back. If Earth chooses violence, even in self-defense, it will confirm every fear the Assembly holds, and it will justify further and greater action against your species. Leave quietly, if you must leave, but do not give them the war they are afraid of and secretly hoping for. The recording ends, and the room falls silent. What did we tell them? I ask. Marcus almost smiles, though there is no humor in it. We told them exactly what you told the assembly chamber before you left, Daniel. We told them we understood, and that we would comply with the timeline given. That's it? Priya asks. No promises? No reassurances? We gave them politeness, Marcus says. Nothing more. Because the truth is, we have no intention of striking anyone. We have every intention of leaving, completely, and letting the assembly discover, on its own, exactly how much of its own stability depended on us being there. I sit back in my chair, letting the weight of everything settle over me. Not war, not revenge, something quieter, and in its own way, far more unsettling, a civilization simply choosing to walk away, taking its labor, its logistics, its quiet contributions to a fragile galactic order, and leaving the rest to discover what remains once that support disappears. How many people know about this plan? I ask. The full scope of it? Fewer than you'd think, Marcus admits. Compartmentalized by design. You two are being briefed now because your roles are about to become critical. Daniel, you'll be leading the final evacuation of our remaining diplomatic assets from assembly space. Priya, you'll be coordinating with colony administrators to ensure every human family, every worker, every research team is accounted for and safely withdrawn before the 90-day deadline. The scale of it begins to sink in properly for the first time, not just an embassy closing its doors. Every human presence, every outpost, every trade office, every research station inside assembly territory, gone, all at once, in a coordinated, silent departure that the rest of the galaxy will only fully understand once it is already finished. There's one more thing you should know, Marcus says, his voice quieter now. The withdrawal isn't just about safety or principle, it's about proving a point the assembly refuses to see. For decades, they've treated humanity as a guest species, tolerated because we were useful, watched because we were unpredictable, and now discarded because we became inconvenient. What they've never bothered to calculate is how much of their own system quietly runs on human labor, human shipping routes, human mediation between rival species who would rather not speak to one another directly. You think removing us will break something, Priya says slowly. I think, Marcus says, removing us will reveal something. Something they should have noticed years ago if they weren't so busy being afraid of us. I glance toward the star charts still glowing on the display, marking the reach of assembly territory, the trade lanes, the shared stations, all of it built on decades of careful, mostly invisible human contribution. 90 days from now, all of that quiet support disappears at once. When do we start? I ask. Marcus stands, buttoning his jacket, his expression settling into something calm and resolute. We already have, he says. You're simply catching up to the rest of us. As the meeting ends and the officials around the table begin gathering their files, I find myself standing at the window overlooking the orbital docks once more, watching ships move with quiet, practiced precision, no longer looking chaotic to me at all. They look exactly like what they are. The opening moves of a plan 17 years in the making, finally beginning to unfold in full view, even as the rest of the galaxy remains completely unaware of what is coming. Priya joins me at the window, her reflection faint against the glass. 90 days, she says quietly. That's not a lot of time to move an entire species out of someone else's house. No, I agree. But it's more than enough time to remind them exactly why they should never have made us leave it. 60 days pass faster than I expect, each one filled with reports, schedules, and quiet farewells that never make it into any official record. I spend most of that time moving between stations, embassies, and colony outposts scattered across assembly space, watching a species pack up its entire presence in a region it helped build for over a generation. The Kepwin Trade Station is the first major post I personally oversee, a sprawling structure that has hosted a human commercial office for nearly 20 years. I arrive to find the embassy staff already loading the final crates onto transport shuttles, moving with a calm efficiency that still surprises me every time I see it. A young logistics officer named Grace Halden meets me at the loading bay, her uniform slightly dusty from 3 straight days of work. "Delegate Ashford," she says, "we're ahead of schedule. Final shuttle departs in 6 hours. Any trouble from station security?" I ask. "None," she says. "They've been oddly quiet, honestly. I think they're still trying to understand why we're not fighting this." I nod, glancing around the mostly empty office space that once buzzed with negotiators, translators, and trade officials from a dozen different worlds. The furniture is gone, the walls stripped of decoration, the only sign that humans were ever here at all, a faint discoloration on the flooring where a large emblem once hung. "Leave nothing behind," I tell her. "No data, no equipment, nothing that could be salvaged or studied later." "Already handled," she says. "We've wiped every terminal and packed every physical record. What we can't take, we've destroyed properly, following proper decommissioning procedure. Nothing dangerous, nothing left behind that could hurt anyone, just nothing left behind that helps them either." I appreciate her precision. This is not an act of anger. It is an act of discipline, the kind of quiet, controlled departure that leaves no excuse for anyone to claim we behaved recklessly on our way out. Over the following weeks, I repeat this same process across a dozen different stations, each departure following the same careful pattern. Human staff leave methodically, taking their knowledge and their labor with them, dismantling systems they built with their own hands, and leaving clean, empty spaces behind where thriving offices once stood. At the Threll Relief Station, the departure carries a different kind of weight. This is where humanity spent years running medical support during a famine that nearly devastated an entire species, and the Threll administrator, a soft-spoken being named Orenthal, meets me personally at the gate. "You are truly leaving," Orenthal says, his translator carrying a note of genuine sadness, "even after everything your people did for mine." "We were asked to leave," I say gently. "We are simply honoring that request." "The assembly asked," Orenthal says. "Many of us never wanted this. I wish you to know that." I place a hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture I have learned carries warmth across several species. "Your people were never our enemy," I tell him. "This was never about you." As we finish loading the final medical supplies onto our transport, Orenthal walks with me toward the boarding ramp, quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "What will happen to the routes you maintained, the supply lines, the coordination between systems who otherwise refuse to speak to one another?" "That is not my concern to solve anymore," I say honestly. "It belongs to the assembly now." He studies me for a long moment, and something like understanding passes across his expression. "You are not simply leaving," he says quietly. "You are leaving a question behind that they will have to answer without you." I do not correct him, because he is right, and because there is nothing gentler I can say that would not also be a lie. By day 70, the pace of withdrawal accelerates dramatically. Entire colony populations begin boarding transport convoys, families carrying only what they can manage, children clutching whatever small comfort items survived the sorting process, elders walking slowly toward ships that will carry them home to a planet many of them have never actually seen with their own eyes. I receive a call from Priya during this stretch, her voice tired but steady over the comm line. "We've relocated over 80% of civilian personnel," she reports. "Remaining 20% are concentrated at outer colony sites, further from major transit routes. It will take everything we have to finish on schedule." "We will finish," I tell her, with more confidence than I sometimes feel. "I know," she says. "I just wanted to hear someone else say it." The most difficult departure comes on day 83, at the final diplomatic outpost still operating inside assembly territory, a modest embassy tucked into the outer ring of the central hub station, the very place where humanity's presence in this chamber first began decades earlier. I stand in the empty embassy hall myself, watching the last crates loaded onto the final departing shuttle, feeling the strange, hollow weight of an ending that has been coming for months but somehow still catches me by surprise now that it has arrived. A station administrator I have known for years, a careful, measured being named Solveig, approaches me quietly as the final preparations are completed. "You could still request an extension," Solveig says. "The assembly might grant it, given the scale of this withdrawal." "We don't want an extension," I tell her honestly. "We want to finish exactly on time. No delays, no excuses given to anyone who might claim we dragged our feet or caused disruption." Solveig studies me carefully, and I can see genuine curiosity behind her expression, mixed with something that might be quiet worry. "Many delegates believe you will return within a year, once the difficulties of full separation become apparent to your own people." "They may believe that," I say, "but belief and reality are different things." "And if they are wrong?" she asks. I glance around the empty hall one final time, at the bare walls, the stripped fixtures, the quiet stillness of a place that once held constant, busy conversation for years. "Then they will discover exactly how wrong they were," I say, "at exactly the moment it becomes impossible to fix." As the final crate is secured aboard the shuttle, I walk the ramp myself, pausing once at the threshold to look back one last time at the embassy hallway, empty and silent, the last physical trace of humanity's presence inside assembly space, about to disappear entirely. Behind me, the outer doors of the shuttle bay begin their slow, mechanical closure, sealing the final chapter of a presence that took decades to build and less than 90 days to completely dismantle. I do not feel triumphant as the shuttle detaches from the station and begins its slow drift toward the departure lane. I do not feel angry either. What I feel more than anything is a strange, heavy stillness, the particular quiet that comes only after every possible preparation has been made, and all that remains is to wait and see what happens next. Through the viewport, I watch the station shrink behind us, its lights still glowing steady against the dark, unaware, or perhaps only beginning to suspect, that everything it depended on without ever fully acknowledging is now leaving for good. Somewhere farther out along the same departure lane, I know other shuttles are making identical journeys from other stations, other colonies, other outposts, each one carrying away another piece of the quiet foundation that helped hold this entire fragile system together for so many years. 90 days, the assembly told us. Time enough, they must have believed, for a proud, frightened species to overreact, to retaliate, to give them the excuse they secretly wanted to justify harsher actions still. Instead, 90 days became the length of time it took humanity to leave with perfect discipline, perfect calm, and not a single act of violence to point toward. As my shuttle finally clears the station's gravity well and turns toward the long journey home, I allow myself, for the first time in months, a small and quiet exhale. We did not fight, we did not beg, we simply left, exactly as promised, exactly on schedule, taking everything we built and leaving behind only the silence of our absence. And somewhere out among those stations, in the days and weeks to come, that silence is about to become very loud indeed. 3 weeks after the final shuttle clears assembly space, I am back on Earth, sitting in a quiet monitoring room with Marcus and a rotating team of analysts, watching a slow-motion collapse unfold across dozens of intercepted transmissions and public broadcasts from systems we no longer have any presence in at all. The first cracks appear exactly where Marcus predicted they would, in the shipping lanes that human logistics companies quietly managed for over a decade. Without our coordination ships, the delicate scheduling that once kept traffic moving smoothly between rival territories begins to break down within days. A broadcast from the Velkar Trade Authority plays on the main screen, a frantic official speaking rapidly through a translator that struggles to keep pace with his agitation. Cargo delays now exceeding standard tolerances across 11 major routes, the translator reports. Automated scheduling systems inherited from departed human contractors are failing to account for regional conflicts previously managed through direct human mediation. Priya, seated beside me, shakes her head slowly. They never even knew our people were quietly settling disputes behind the scenes, she says. They just assumed the system worked on its own. It never worked on its own, Marcus says. It worked because we made sure it did, every single day, without ever asking for credit. Over the following 2 weeks, the situation deteriorates further. Smaller trade fleets, no longer able to rely on the safe passage corridors human escort ships once maintained through contested space, begin falling prey to independent raiders who had previously avoided those routes entirely, wary of running into well-organized human patrols. A merchant captain from a minor trading guild appears in one intercepted transmission, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "We lost 2 full cargo convoys this month alone," he says. "Routes that were safe for 15 years are no longer safe. Nobody patrols them properly anymore. The human escorts are simply gone, and nobody has stepped up to replace them." I watch these reports accumulate day after day, and I feel none of the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, there is something quieter and more complicated settling in my chest, a recognition that the fragile order humanity helped maintain across so many rival territories is now unraveling exactly as predicted, and that real consequences, real hardships, are falling on people who never voted for our exile in the first place. It feels strange watching this happen, I admit to Priya one evening, as we review the latest reports together. "It should feel strange," she says. "We're not celebrating a war. We're watching a system reveal how dependent it always was on the very people it decided to throw away." The panic reaches a new level 3 weeks into the 4th month, when a coalition of smaller species, previously mediated entirely through human diplomatic channels, finds itself suddenly without any framework for resolving an old territorial dispute that human negotiators had kept peacefully contained for nearly a decade. Marcus brings the report to me personally, his expression grim. The Dorith Collective and the Kesh Alliance are moving ships toward a contested border region, he says. No human mediators remain to manage the negotiation process that kept this dispute quiet for years. "Is there risk of open conflict?" I ask. "Growing risk, yes," Marcus says. "Assembly leadership is scrambling to appoint new mediators, but none of the remaining member species trust each other enough to accept a neutral party from within their own ranks. Humanity was uniquely positioned for that role, precisely because we had no historical grievance with either side." Unquote. I think back to years spent quietly shuttling between exactly these 2 territories, sitting through long, careful negotiations that rarely made headlines but consistently prevented small disagreements from becoming larger ones. Nobody outside a narrow circle of diplomats ever understood how much quiet, unglamorous work went into keeping that particular peace intact. "They're going to have to find their own way through this," I say quietly. "They may not manage it," Marcus replies. "Not without us." A week later, the Assembly issues its first public statement acknowledging what it calls logistical adjustments following humanity's departure, careful, diplomatic language that avoids admitting any direct fault or miscalculation. But beneath the careful wording, I can read the growing concern clearly enough. Then comes the message that changes everything. It arrives quietly, routed through an old, mostly unused diplomatic channel, a formal request from the Assembly's Central Council requesting direct contact with Earth's government regarding what they describe as matters of mutual interest requiring urgent discussion. Marcus calls an emergency meeting the moment the message is decoded, and I find myself once again seated at that same long table, surrounded by officials who look far more energized than they did during our earlier briefings. "They're asking to talk," Marcus says, unable to fully hide the satisfaction in his voice. Barely 4 months after cutting off all contact, they're requesting direct engagement. "What do they want?" Priya asks. "They don't say explicitly," Marcus replies, "but given the timing, given the reports we've been tracking, I think it's safe to assume this isn't a courtesy call." I study the message myself, reading through its careful, formal language, searching for any hint of what specifically prompted this sudden shift. Between the polite diplomatic phrasing, I recognize the unmistakable tone of an organization that has discovered, far too late, exactly how much it relied on something it chose to discard. Over the following days, additional reports continue arriving, painting an increasingly clear picture of a galaxy struggling to adjust to humanity's absence. A major research consortium reports the collapse of 3 long-running scientific collaborations that depended heavily on human data analysis expertise. A mid-sized trading bloc reports the total failure of a currency exchange system that human financial administrators had quietly stabilized for years. Even minor administrative functions across dozens of shared stations begin experiencing delays and confusion. Tasks that human staff once handled efficiently now sitting unattended, waiting for replacements who either do not exist or lack the necessary training. "It's almost funny," Priya says one evening, reviewing yet another report describing minor bureaucratic chaos at a station we evacuated months earlier. They spent years complaining about how much space we took up in their systems, and now they're discovering exactly how much of that system was actually us. "It's not funny," I say, though I understand her tone. "It's exactly what we expected, but it's still real hardship for a lot of people who had no say in any of this." She sobers slightly, nodding. "You're right. I just needed to say something out loud instead of just feeling it quietly. I understand that feeling well, because I share it. There is a strange, uncomfortable space between vindication and guilt that I find myself occupying more and more as these reports continue accumulating. A recognition that humanity's quiet withdrawal, exactly as carefully planned as it was, still carries real consequences for ordinary people across dozens of worlds who never voted for our exile and never wanted to see us leave." Marcus seems to sense this tension in both of us during one of our final briefings before the requested assembly contact takes place. "I want to be clear about something," he says. "This was never designed to punish innocent people. It was designed to demonstrate a truth the assembly refused to acknowledge honestly, that humanity's contribution to this system was never fully appreciated, and that removing it would carry consequences nobody adequately prepared for. And now that it has," I say, "what happens next?" Marcus glances toward the message still displayed on the main screen, the Assembly's formal request for direct contact, waiting patiently for our response. "Now," he says, "we decide exactly what kind of relationship we want to rebuild, if any, and on exactly whose terms it gets rebuilt." That evening, alone in my quarters, I find myself thinking back to the chamber where this entire crisis began, to Vesik's calm, measured voice, delivering a verdict he likely believed was simply routine political theater, a minor adjustment to galactic order that would pass without lasting consequence. I wonder if he has seen the reports by now, if he understands yet exactly what his chamber set in motion the day it decided humanity's rapid rise was worth punishing rather than understanding. I do not know what tone the Assembly will bring to this requested contact, whether apology, negotiation, or something closer to demand disguised as diplomacy, but I know, with growing certainty, that whatever conversation comes next will not resemble the one we left behind in that chamber 4 months ago. We are no longer the guests seeking permission to stay. We are the absence they are finally being forced to reckon with, and for the first time since this entire crisis began, I find myself genuinely curious to see exactly how they choose to fill it. The Assembly delegation arrives on Earth 11 days after their initial request for contact, and I stand at the edge of the landing platform, watching their shuttle descend through clear morning sky, feeling a strange sense of symmetry with the day I once left their chamber for the final time. Marcus stands beside me, along with Priya and a small group of officials representing Earth's newly formed Independent Council, a body established quietly in the weeks following our full withdrawal, tasked with managing exactly this kind of moment. The shuttle lands smoothly, and after a brief pause, its boarding ramp lowers to reveal Vesik himself, the same chief arbiter who delivered our exile verdict months earlier, accompanied by 3 additional delegates I recognize from the chamber. His expression, usually composed and unreadable, carries a tension I have never seen from him before. "Delegate Ashford," Vesic says as he approaches, his translator carrying a careful, measured tone. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "I'm no longer a delegate," I say simply. "None of us are. We left that role behind the day we left your chamber." A flicker of something crosses his expression, discomfort perhaps, or recognition. "Of course," he says. "My apologies. How should I address you now?" "Daniel Ashford will do," I say. I represent Earth's independent council in this discussion, alongside my colleagues. We lead the delegation into a modest meeting hall, nothing like the towering chamber where our exile was announced, a simple room with a long table, comfortable chairs, and wide windows overlooking a quiet stretch of coastline. I notice Vesic glancing around the space, perhaps expecting something grander, something that would signal desperation or eagerness to please. He finds neither. Once everyone is seated, Vesic begins, his tone careful and deliberate. "I will speak plainly, given the circumstances. Since your withdrawal, the Assembly has experienced significant disruption across multiple systems. Trade routes have become unstable. Diplomatic tensions between several member species have escalated without proper mediation. Certain administrative and logistical functions your people once managed have proven far more difficult to replace than anticipated." "We're aware," Marcus says simply. "We've been monitoring public reports." Vesic nods slowly. "The Assembly Council has authorized this delegation to discuss the possibility of reinstating diplomatic relations and potentially reopening limited trade and mediation arrangements under revised terms." I glance briefly at Priya, who maintains a carefully neutral expression, though I can see the same quiet satisfaction I feel reflected somewhere behind her eyes. "Before we discuss any potential arrangement," I say, "I think it's important to be clear about something. Earth did not withdraw from Assembly space as an act of aggression, and we are not returning out of desperation either. We complied fully and peacefully with the exile your chamber issued. We are here now purely because your council requested this conversation, not because we require anything from you." Vesic's jaw tightens slightly, though his voice remains controlled. "Understood," he says. "We recognize the circumstances of your departure were handled with considerable restraint." "More than considerable," Priya adds evenly. "We left exactly on schedule, took nothing that wasn't ours, and caused no harm to any station, colony, or vessel during our withdrawal. We would ask that be acknowledged clearly, given how differently this situation might have unfolded." One of the additional delegates, a quieter figure who has not yet spoken, leans forward slightly. "It is acknowledged," she says. "Fully. Many of us on the council argued against the exile decision from the beginning. We simply lacked the votes to prevent it." Vesic glances toward her briefly, an unspoken tension passing between them, before he continues. "Regardless of past disagreements within our own ranks, the current situation requires practical solutions. We are prepared to discuss reinstatement of full diplomatic status, restoration of trade agreements, and a formal invitation for renewed mediation assistance in ongoing regional disputes." Marcus leans back slightly in his chair, his expression calm but firm. "Before we discuss any of that, I think Earth's Council should outline exactly what conditions we would require for any renewed relationship, given everything that's happened." Vesic inclines his head. "Please." I take a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle fully across my shoulders. This is the conversation 17 years of quiet preparation we're always building toward, not a moment of revenge, but a moment of redefinition. "First," I say, "any future relationship must recognize Earth's full sovereignty, with representation equal to any other member species, not conditional tolerance based on perceived usefulness. We will not accept a return to guest status." Vesic nods slowly. "Agreed, in principle." "Second," Priya continues, "any mediation assistance we provide going forward will be offered through formal, compensated agreements, not informal goodwill arrangements, assumed and expected without proper recognition. If our labor and expertise hold real value to this system, That value will be properly acknowledged going forward. Understood, Vesic says, and I notice a flicker of something almost like relief crossing his expression, as though he expected far harsher demands. Third, Marcus adds, Earth reserves full right to decline participation in any future assembly action we consider unjust, without facing threats of exile or sanction simply for disagreement. The events of the past several months made clear exactly how quickly cooperation can be weaponized against the party providing it. That vulnerability will not be repeated. Vesic is quiet for a long moment, glancing toward his fellow delegates before responding. These conditions are significant, he says finally, but given recent events, I believe the Council will find them reasonable, if not entirely comfortable. They shouldn't be entirely comfortable, I say, not unkindly. Comfort was what allowed this situation to happen in the first place. A relationship built on convenience, rather than mutual respect, will always be vulnerable to exactly what happened 4 months ago. The quieter delegate speaks again, her voice carrying something genuine beneath the formal diplomatic tone. May I ask something directly, outside the formal terms of this discussion? Of course, I say. Do you believe, she asks, that your people intend to return fully to assembly space, or is this arrangement, if agreed upon, simply a temporary bridge toward eventual, permanent independence? I consider the question carefully before answering, aware of how much weight my response carries. I believe, I say slowly, that Earth will engage with the assembly wherever mutual respect and mutual benefit genuinely exist. We are not seeking isolation for its own sake, but we are no longer willing to accept a relationship defined entirely by your comfort and our accommodation. Whatever comes next will be built on equal footing, or it will not be built at all. Vesic studies me for a long moment, and something shifts subtly in his expression, not quite respect, but something adjacent to it, an acknowledgement perhaps that the species sitting across from him now is not the same cautious, accommodating presence that once sat quietly at the edges of his chamber, careful never to overstep. I will bring these terms to the full council, Vesic says finally. I expect there will be considerable debate, but given current circumstances, I believe acceptance is likely. We're in no rush, Marcus says calmly. Earth has adjusted well to full independence these past months. We can wait as long as necessary for the Assembly to decide what kind of relationship it actually wants with us going forward. The meeting concludes shortly afterward, with polite, formal farewells that carry none of the warmth of old diplomatic customs, but none of the hostility of open conflict either, simply the careful, measured tone of two parties beginning to understand each other on entirely new terms. As the assembly shuttle lifts off from the platform and disappears into the sky, Priya stands beside me, watching it go. Do you think they'll accept the terms? She asks. I think they'll have no real choice, I say. Not if they want any real chance of stabilizing what's happening across their own territory. Marcus joins us, his expression thoughtful. This is only the beginning of a much longer process, he says. Rebuilding trust, if it happens at all, will take years, maybe longer. But today, for the first time, we set the terms of that process ourselves. I think back to the moment this entire journey began, sitting in that towering chamber, listening to Vesic deliver a verdict meant to diminish us, to push humanity back into a smaller, safer, more controllable position within a system that never fully valued what we contributed to it. I think of the quiet, careful discipline of our withdrawal, the calm, methodical evacuation of every outpost, every colony, every embassy, executed without a single act of aggression, without giving anyone the excuse they secretly wanted. And I think of what comes next, not war, not revenge, but something steadier, and in its own way, more powerful. A civilization that chose to leave quietly rather than fight, and returned only once it could do so on equal footing, having proven, without ever raising a weapon, exactly how essential its quiet, patient presence had always been. That evening, standing on the observation deck of Earth's central orbital platform, I watch a new fleet of ships moving steadily into formation along the horizon, Vessels built during those long, quiet years of preparation, now finally being deployed openly for the first time, no longer hidden behind humanitarian classifications or civilian cover programs. These are not ships built for conquest. They are ships built for independence, for exploration, for trade conducted entirely on our own terms, ready to engage with the wider galaxy only when that engagement respects exactly what humanity is, rather than what it can be conveniently used for. Priya joins me at the railing, watching the same formation drift slowly against the darkening sky. "It's strange," she says quietly. 4 months ago, I thought this was the end of something. Our place in that chamber, our role in that system, everything we spent over a decade building together. And now, I ask? She smiles faintly, watching the ships continue their steady formation overhead. "Now I think it was never an ending at all," she says. "Just a very long, very quiet beginning, finally ready to be seen." I nod slowly, feeling something settle fully into place within me for the first time since that verdict was delivered in a chamber far from home. We did not fight our way out of that exile. We did not beg our way back into anyone's good graces either. We simply proved, through patience and discipline rather than aggression, exactly what a civilization forced to walk away can become once it finally stops asking for permission to exist on its own terms. Above us, the fleet continues its slow, steady formation against the darkening sky, no longer refugees fleeing a system that discarded them, but a civilization standing fully, quietly, and permanently on its own 2 feet, ready now to decide, entirely for itself, exactly what role it wishes to play in the wider galaxy going forward. And for the first time in longer than I can clearly remember, I feel no uncertainty at all about what comes next.